My billionaire boss could have chosen any executive for his family's charity gala. He chose me instead. Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive into today's emotional story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our future stories. It only takes a second. It's completely free, and your support helps us continue creating heartfelt, dramatic, and unforgettable romances just like this one. We truly appreciate every single one of you. And before we begin, we'd love to know where you're watching from today. Leave your city or country in the comments below. We always enjoy seeing viewers from around the world. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let's return to our story and meet the man whose ordinary workday was about to change his life forever. The biggest moments in your life rarely begin with applause. Most of the time, they begin with someone quietly seeing your worth before anyone else does. If you had asked me a year ago whether a billionaire would ever know my name, I probably would have laughed hard enough to spill my coffee. People like Adrian Hayes didn't notice people like me. At least, that was the story I had repeated to myself for almost 3 years. My name is Luca Bennett, and I worked as a senior project manager at Hayes Global Foundation, the charitable branch of one of the largest family-owned corporations in America. Every weekday started the same. I caught the 7:10 commuter train into downtown Chicago, grabbed a plain black coffee from the corner cafe that somehow remembered everyone's order except mine, and walked the 6 blocks to our gleaming glass headquarters before 8 o'clock. By the time the executives arrived in tailored Italian suits, I had already answered dozens of emails, solved at least 2 scheduling disasters, and quietly fixed problems no one else even realized existed. It wasn't glamorous work, but I believed something my late mother used to tell me. Character is what you do when nobody is watching. So I kept doing my job, never expecting applause. The executive floor operated like its own universe. Vice presidents floated from meeting to meeting, surrounded by assistants. Department heads competed for visibility. Every presentation felt like a performance. Everyone wanted to be seen. Everyone wanted to impress Adrian Hayes. I wasn't one of them. My office wasn't even an office, really. It was a modest workspace tucked beside the community outreach department, where stacks of donation reports and scholarship applications occupied more room than decorative furniture ever could. I preferred it that way. While other divisions celebrated quarterly profits, our small team celebrated things that couldn't be measured on financial reports. A family receiving emergency housing. A high school senior becoming the first in their family to attend college. A children's library opening in a neighborhood that desperately needed one. Those victories mattered more to me than corner offices ever could. Still, I knew exactly who Adrian Hayes was. Everyone did. At 36, he had become the youngest CEO in company history after guiding the Hayes family empire through economic uncertainty without sacrificing its philanthropic mission. Business magazines called him brilliant. Financial networks described him as disciplined. Employees mostly described him as intimidating. He wasn't cruel. He simply carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent his entire life inside rooms where every decision affected thousands of people. In nearly 3 years, we had exchanged exactly 4 conversations, none lasting longer than 30 seconds. He nodded politely when our paths crossed. I respectfully stepped aside. That was the natural order of things, or so I believed. Everything changed on an ordinary Monday morning. The executive conference room buzzed with anticipation as department leaders gathered for the annual planning meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, only delivering updated outreach reports before slipping back to my desk. I placed the folders neatly beside the conference table and turned toward the door just as it opened. Adrian Hayes entered without fanfare, wearing a navy suit and carrying nothing except a leather notebook. Conversations stopped instantly. Every executive straightened in their chairs. I lowered my eyes, prepared to leave unnoticed as always. Then his calm voice crossed the room. Luca Bennett. For a second, I honestly thought there had to be another Luca somewhere behind me. I turned slowly. Adrian was looking directly at me, not through me, not past me, at me. He held my gaze with the same composed expression everyone in the company knew so well before saying words that would quietly rearrange the entire course of my life. I'd like you to accompany me to my family's charity gala this Saturday. I was certain I had misheard him. The silence inside the conference room stretched so long that I could actually hear the faint hum of the air conditioning above us. Several executives glanced toward me with the same confused expression I knew was written across my own face. Adrian did not repeat himself. He simply waited, calm and patient, as though inviting a project manager to the most anticipated charity gala in the city was the most ordinary thing in the world. Cleared my throat. Sir, are you sure you mean me? A few people shifted awkwardly in their seats. One vice president even looked over his shoulder as if another Luca might suddenly appear. Adrian's lips hinted at the smallest smile. I have only one Luca Bennett working here. A nervous laugh escaped before I could stop it. Right? Of course. Please stop by my office at 3 this afternoon, he continued. We have details to discuss. Then, without another explanation, he opened his notebook and began the meeting. Just like that, I became invisible again, except this time everyone in the room was staring at me. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Numbers filled the presentation screen. Budgets were reviewed. Expansion plans were discussed. I could not have repeated a single slide if someone had offered me $1 million. Every few minutes I caught someone looking at me. Curiosity, confusion, a little jealousy. By lunchtime, the entire building seemed to know. My phone buzzed nonstop. My best friend Emily from Community Outreach sent the first message. Tell me you accidentally won the lottery because nothing else explains what I just heard. Another coworker wrote, Are you secretly related to the Hayes family? Someone else joked that I must have uncovered classified information about the CEO. I answered none of them because I honestly had no answers myself. At exactly 3 o'clock, I stood outside the executive office, adjusting a tie that suddenly felt much too tight. Adrian's assistant greeted me with a warm smile. He is expecting you. Expecting me. Even hearing those words felt unreal. His office overlooked the Chicago skyline, where sunlight reflected off Lake Michigan like scattered pieces of glass. It was elegant without being excessive. Bookshelves replaced expensive artwork. Framed photographs of community projects lined one wall instead of corporate awards. Adrian looked up from his desk as I entered. Please have a seat. His voice carried none of the distance I had expected. He closed the folder in front of him and folded his hands. You have probably been wondering why I invited you. I would be lying if I said I had not. He nodded once. The Hayes Family Charity Gala is not a business event. It is about the people behind the mission. Every year my relatives insist on inviting executives who can attract investors. This year I want someone different. I waited quietly. 3 months ago, he continued, I visited the West Side Learning Center without announcing who I was. I blinked. That was one of our smallest education programs. Hardly anyone from headquarters ever visited. Adrian continued, I watched you spend nearly 2 hours helping a 12-year-old girl finish her science project after your scheduled meeting had already ended. No cameras. No press. No supervisors. You stayed because she mattered. My heart skipped. I had completely forgotten about that afternoon. It had never crossed my mind that anyone important had been there. Adrian's eyes remained steady. Most people become generous when someone is watching. You were generous when no one was. That is the person I want standing beside me Saturday night. For the first time since entering his office, I had absolutely nothing to say. The following morning arrived with a strange mixture of excitement and quiet dread. My usual routine suddenly felt unfamiliar, as though the ordinary rhythm of my life had shifted by a single degree and nothing quite lined up anymore. I still boarded the 7:10 train. I still carried the same worn leather messenger bag my mother had given me after college. I still stopped at the same corner cafe for black coffee. Yet every familiar face seemed to be studying me a little longer than before. By the time I reached Hayes' global headquarters, whispers were already floating through the lobby like invisible currents. Conversations softened as I walked past. A few co-workers smiled with genuine encouragement. Others offered polite congratulations that somehow sounded more like cautious curiosity. I reminded myself not to overthink it. Adrian had chosen me for a reason, and that reason had nothing to do with office politics. At least I hoped so. Around mid-morning, an email from his assistant appeared in my inbox with a simple itinerary. Friday afternoon would be reserved for tuxedo fittings. Saturday morning included a walkthrough of the gala venue. Saturday evening was the event itself. Attached was a short note from Adrian written without unnecessary formality. Please wear whatever makes you feel comfortable during the fitting. We are preparing you for the evening, not changing who you are. I read that final sentence 3 separate times. Most executives I had met believed appearances created value. Adrian seemed to believe value already existed before appearances ever entered the room. Emily leaned against my office door carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. You have that look, she said. The one you get before presenting scholarship proposals. I smiled weakly. Is it that obvious? You are trying very hard to convince yourself you belong somewhere new. She handed me one of the cups. You know what I think? I shook my head. I think somebody finally noticed the version of you the rest of us have known for years. Her words settled quietly inside me. Sometimes encouragement arrives exactly when doubt begins speaking the loudest. Friday afternoon brought another first. The tailor greeted Adrian by name before leading us through rows of carefully crafted jackets and polished shoes. I felt completely out of place among fabrics that probably cost more than my monthly rent. While measurements were taken, I apologized for the inconvenience. Adrian looked genuinely puzzled. Why are you apologizing? Because this must be expensive. He considered my answer for a moment before replying softly. Luca, generosity loses its meaning when people constantly calculate its cost. That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. On the drive back to the office, Chicago rolled past the car windows in shades of gold beneath the setting sun. Families filled neighborhood parks. Food trucks lined busy streets. Cyclists weaved between evening traffic. Adrian watched the city in thoughtful silence before speaking again. My grandfather used to tell me that wealth is measured by opportunity, not possessions. He glanced toward me with a calm expression that carried none of the distance I had once associated with him. The gala raises millions of dollars every year. People assume the evening is about elegant speeches and expensive donations. They are wrong. If guests leave inspired to care more deeply about someone else's future, then we succeed. If they leave impressed only by luxury, then we fail. For the first time since this unexpected journey had begun, my nervousness slowly gave way to something steadier. I realized I was not preparing to enter a room full of powerful strangers. I was preparing to stand beside someone who believed compassion deserved the brightest spotlight of all. Saturday evening arrived beneath a clear autumn sky, and as the car turned onto the long tree-lined drive leading to the Hayes family estate, I finally understood why people described the annual gala as one of the most prestigious charitable events in the country. Elegant lights shimmered across the historic mansion, musicians filled the evening air with gentle orchestral melodies, and guests in beautifully tailored formal wear greeted one another with warm smiles beneath rows of white lanterns. It was breathtaking, yet strangely peaceful. Nothing about the evening felt designed to intimidate. Instead, it seemed carefully arranged to remind every guest that generosity could also be beautiful. I stepped from the car, quietly adjusting the cuff of my tuxedo, still unable to believe I belonged there. Adrian joined me a moment later, looking composed as always, but there was something different in his expression tonight. The reserved executive I had known at the office seemed to soften the instant he walked onto the grounds where generations of his family had gathered for a shared purpose. He noticed me taking in the surroundings and offered a reassuring smile. Nervous? He asked. I laughed honestly. I think nervous stopped describing this feeling about 30 minutes ago. His smile widened just enough to ease the tension in my chest. Good. That means you still care. Before I could answer, several guests approached Adrian to welcome him. They greeted him with respect, but many of them quickly turned toward me with polite curiosity. Some introduced themselves warmly. Others tried to determine my role without asking directly. I I simply introduced myself as Luca Bennett from the Foundation's community outreach team. Each time I said those words, I expected surprise. Instead, Adrian quietly reinforced them. Luca leads some of the most meaningful projects we support. He never exaggerated. He never praised me beyond the truth. Yet every introduction somehow made me stand a little taller. As we moved through the reception hall, I noticed photographs displayed along the walls instead of portraits of the Hayes family. There were children reading inside newly built libraries, veterans receiving housing assistance, families celebrating new homes after devastating storms, and students proudly holding college acceptance letters. Each photograph represented a life changed rather than a fortune accumulated. I stopped in front of one image showing a smiling group of elementary school students gathered around shelves filled with books. Adrian joined me quietly. "That library almost never happened," he said. "Funding disappeared twice before your department found new community partners." I looked at the photograph again, suddenly recognizing one of the teachers standing in the background. "I remember that day," I whispered. "Those children named every bookshelf after someone who encouraged them to keep learning." Adrian nodded. "Most donors never hear stories like that. Tonight they should." Before I could ask what he meant, the master of ceremonies announced that dinner would soon begin. Hundreds of guests slowly made their way into the grand ballroom, where elegant centerpieces reflected the warm glow of crystal chandeliers overhead. I assumed Adrian would escort me to an ordinary table somewhere near the back of the room. Instead, he guided me toward the front, where members of the Hayes family and several longtime supporters were already gathering. A few conversations paused as we approached. Curious eyes followed us. Adrian calmly pulled out the chair beside his own and looked at me with complete confidence. "This is exactly where you belong," he said. For the first time that evening, I almost believed him. Dinner unfolded with an effortless elegance that somehow made me even more aware of how unfamiliar this world was. Crystal glasses caught the warm light above the ballroom. Soft conversations blended with a string quartet playing near the stage, and every course seemed prepared with extraordinary care. Yet the most remarkable part of the evening was not the luxury surrounding us. It was watching Adrian interact with every guest as though each person mattered equally. He spoke with major donors and first-time volunteers with the same genuine attention. He remembered names, asked thoughtful questions, and listened far more than he talked. The image the business magazines had created of an untouchable billionaire slowly disappeared, replaced by someone whose quiet confidence came from purpose rather than status. As dessert was served, the master of ceremonies welcomed Adrian to the stage. The applause filled the ballroom, but Adrian raised a hand with a gentle smile before saying, "Tonight is not about celebrating a family. It is about celebrating the people who refuse to believe that kindness has limits." The room grew still. He spoke about scholarships, neighborhood libraries, housing initiatives, and medical assistance programs. Instead of impressive financial figures, he shared stories of ordinary people whose lives had been changed because strangers had chosen compassion over convenience. Every sentence felt sincere. Then, without warning, he looked directly toward my table. "There is someone here tonight who represents the spirit this foundation was built upon," he said. My heart skipped. "Luca, would you join me for a moment?" Hundreds of faces turned in my direction. My legs felt strangely heavy as I stood, yet Adrian's calm expression somehow steadied me. When I reached the stage, he stepped aside instead of remaining in the spotlight. "Several months ago," he continued, "I visited one of our education programs without introducing myself. I watched this man stay long after everyone else had left because one young student needed help finishing her science project. There were no cameras. There was no recognition waiting for him. He stayed because he believed one child's future deserved his time." The ballroom remained completely silent. Adrian looked at me with quiet encouragement. "People often ask what leadership looks like. Sometimes leadership is simply choosing to care when nobody expects you to." He handed me the microphone. My first instinct was to give it back. Public speaking had never frightened me, but speaking in front of philanthropists, business leaders, and the Hayes family was something entirely different. I took a slow breath and glanced toward the photographs displayed around the ballroom. Suddenly, I remembered the children in the library, the families receiving new homes, the scholarship recipients who had cried while opening acceptance letters. None of those moments had been about recognition. They had always been about hope. I do not believe generosity belongs to extraordinary people, I began quietly. I think it belongs to ordinary people who make extraordinary choices one moment at a time. Every volunteer, every teacher, every donor, every neighbor who decides to help someone else becomes part of a story much bigger than themselves. Real change does not begin with wealth. It begins with willingness. As I finished speaking, the silence lasted only a heartbeat before the ballroom erupted into warm applause. I looked toward Adrian, expecting satisfaction or relief. Instead, I saw quiet gratitude in his eyes, as though this was exactly the moment he had hoped everyone would experience. For the first time since arriving at the gala, I realized he had never invited me there to impress anyone. He had invited me there to remind an entire room that the greatest investment anyone could ever make was in another human being. The applause lingered long after I stepped away from the microphone, yet the loudest sound I could hear was my own heartbeat. I returned to my seat feeling as though I had walked into someone else's life by mistake. Guests who had barely noticed me earlier were now introducing themselves with genuine warmth. They did not ask about my job title or my salary. They wanted to hear about the students, the neighborhood libraries, the families whose lives had changed because ordinary people had chosen to help. It reminded me that stories always traveled farther than statistics. As dinner came to a close, Adrian quietly leaned toward me. "Would you like to take a walk before the next program begins?" I nodded, grateful for a chance to breathe. We stepped through tall glass doors onto a stone terrace overlooking the estate gardens. The evening air carried the crisp scent of autumn leaves, and strings of warm lights stretched across the pathways like tiny constellations. For several moments, we simply walked in comfortable silence. It surprised me how natural that silence felt. I had always assumed someone as accomplished as Adrian needed to fill every conversation with strategy and direction. Instead, he seemed perfectly content to let the night speak for itself. Eventually, he stopped beside a quiet fountain. "You handled yourself exactly as I hoped you would," he said. I smiled faintly. I was convinced I was about to embarrass both of us. He shook his head. "You were never chosen because I expected a perfect speech. You were chosen because you tell the truth." His words settled between us before he continued in a softer voice. "There is something I have never shared publicly." I waited without interrupting. When I was 19, my younger brother, Evan, became seriously ill. During those months, my family could afford every treatment available, but we met parents who could barely afford to drive their children to the hospital. His eyes remained fixed on the fountain as the water reflected the lights around us. My brother recovered, and many other families were not as fortunate. Afterward, he told me that if he ever had the chance, he wanted to spend his life making certain fewer people felt forgotten. Adrian paused, drawing a slow breath. A few years later, we lost him unexpectedly because of a completely unrelated accident. Since then, every scholarship, every community program, every dollar this foundation invests has carried a small part of his dream. I felt an unexpected tightness in my chest. Suddenly, every photograph inside the ballroom carried a deeper meaning. This was never about preserving a family name. It was about honoring someone whose kindness had outlived his years. "I am sorry," I said quietly. Adrian offered a grateful nod. "Most people see the gala and assume it exists to celebrate success. I see it as a promise that my brother's compassion will continue through other people." He looked at me for the first time since sharing the story. "When I watched you helping that young student months ago, I recognized the same quiet instinct. You never asked what you would gain. You simply stayed." I looked toward the lights glowing across the gardens and realized something had changed inside me. The distance I had always imagined between us had never been built from wealth or position. It had been built from assumptions. Standing beside Adrian that evening, I no longer saw the powerful executive whose name appeared on magazine covers. I saw a man carrying love, grief, hope, and responsibility with remarkable grace. And without either of us saying another word, I understood that the evening had become about far more than a charity gala. It had become the beginning of two lives learning to trust each other through the simple language of compassion. The warmth of the garden lingered with me as Adrian and I returned to the ballroom, but the atmosphere inside had changed almost imperceptibly. Smiles remained, conversations continued, and elegant music still drifted through the room. Yet beneath the polished surface I sensed another current moving quietly between the guests. Several members of the Hayes family were gathered near the stage, speaking in careful voices while occasionally glancing in our direction. I tried not to think much of it until a distinguished man in his early 60s approached us with a courteous smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Adrian," he said warmly, "may I borrow you for a private conversation?" Adrian nodded. "Of course. Luca, I will be right back." I watched them disappear into a nearby sitting room, telling myself there was nothing unusual about family members discussing the evening. Still, something in the older man's expression left me uneasy. A few minutes later, I stepped toward one of the display tables showcasing photographs from community programs. A woman standing beside me admired the images before quietly saying, "These are beautiful, are they not?" I smiled. "They really are." She introduced herself as Margaret Hayes, one of Adrian's aunts. Unlike some of the other relatives, her kindness felt effortless. She studied one photograph of children opening boxes of donated books before speaking again. Adrian has not smiled this much at one of these galas in years. I looked at her, surprised. "He seems very comfortable tonight." Margaret gave a gentle laugh. "Comfortable, yes. Happy, not always. There is a difference." Before I could ask what she meant, the sitting room door opened. Adrian walked back into the ballroom, his expression calm, but I recognized the subtle tension around his eyes. The older gentleman followed him toward the stage, where the master of ceremonies announced an unscheduled presentation recognizing several longtime sponsors. As the program continued, another member of the Hayes family took the microphone. He praised the generosity of donors, celebrated the evening's fundraising goals, and then shifted the focus in an unexpected direction. "In today's world," he said with practiced confidence, "public image is essential to sustaining charitable success. Every decision we make must strengthen the Hayes legacy." A large screen behind him displayed promotional images highlighting the family's achievements. I noticed that many of the photographs featuring volunteers and community members had quietly disappeared from the presentation, replaced by glamorous portraits of board members and formal events. Something inside me tightened. It was subtle, but the message had changed. The people the foundation existed to serve were no longer at the center of the story. During a brief pause, the speaker invited comments from guests about the future of the foundation. Before I had time to second-guess myself, I stood. My heartbeat quickened, but the faces of the children from the library and the families we had helped filled my mind. "May I share something?" I asked respectfully. The room fell silent. Tonight has reminded us that generosity changes lives because it focuses on people, not prestige. The photographs we admired when we arrived were powerful because they showed hope, not status. If the mission ever becomes more important than the people it serves, then we risk forgetting why the foundation exists in the first place. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Adrian rose from his seat. He looked around the ballroom before speaking with calm certainty. "I agree completely. Our family name only matters if it points people toward compassion. Luca has expressed the values this foundation was created to protect, and I stand behind every word he has said." At that moment I realized he was not defending an employee in front of influential guests. He was choosing integrity over convenience, and in doing so, he quietly erased whatever distance had once existed between us. For the rest of the evening, the ballroom felt different. The conversations were still elegant, the music remained soft, and the laughter echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers. Yet something more meaningful had settled over the room. Guests were no longer discussing who had donated the largest amount or which family held the greatest influence. Instead, they spoke about community programs, scholarship recipients, and new partnerships that could expand the foundation's work. It was as though a quiet reminder had redirected everyone's attention toward the people whose lives would actually be changed. Adrian caught my eye from across the room and offered a grateful smile that needed no explanation. Later that night, after the final guests had begun leaving, the grand ballroom slowly transformed from a glamorous celebration back into an ordinary event space. Volunteers carefully packed display photographs. Staff members folded table linens with practiced efficiency. Fresh flowers were gathered into boxes that would be delivered to local nursing homes the following morning instead of being discarded. Without thinking twice, I removed my suit jacket, rolled up my sleeves, and began helping move chairs toward the storage area. Felt natural. After all, this was the part of community work I understood best. A few moments later, I heard footsteps beside me. Adrian had quietly done exactly the same thing. The chief executive of a multibillion-dollar company was carrying chairs beside me without a single photographer in sight. I laughed softly. I have a feeling your family would not expect you to end the evening doing this. He balanced another chair with an easy smile. My grandfather always insisted that whoever hosts the gathering should help clean up after it. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, placing the final chairs against the ballroom wall. There was something strangely peaceful about hearing only the gentle scrape of polished wood across the floor and the distant hum of the cleaning crew finishing their work. When the last table had been cleared, Adrian looked around the now quiet room. "It always amazes me," he said, "how quickly a celebration disappears." I looked at the empty stage where hundreds of people had applauded only an hour earlier. Maybe that is why the people matter more than the event itself. They carry the evening forward after the lights go out. Adrian turned toward me with an expression I had never seen before. The confidence was still there, but it had been joined by a remarkable openness. "Do you know why I asked you to come tonight?" he asked softly. I smiled. "I thought I did." He shook his head. Gently, "You reminded me that leadership is not about standing in front of people. It is about standing beside them." Somewhere along the way, I became so focused on protecting my family's mission that I nearly forgot how important it is to share it with someone who sees the world through compassion instead of responsibility alone. His words settled quietly between us. Then he added, almost as though he had been carrying the thought for a very long time, "Tonight you did not protect my family's reputation. You reminded me why we began this journey in the first place." I felt warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the ballroom lights. I reached out instinctively, and our hands met for only a brief moment, a simple gesture filled with trust rather than spectacle. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. Standing together in the peaceful silence of an empty ballroom, surrounded by nothing more than stacked chairs and fading lights, I realized that the strongest connections are rarely built through grand declarations. They grow quietly through shared values, mutual respect, and the choice to keep showing up for one another, even after everyone else has gone home. 1 year later, the ballroom looked familiar, yet everything about the evening felt different. The photographs lining the entrance no longer focused on elegant dinners or distinguished guests. Instead, they celebrated teachers opening new classrooms, veterans receiving permanent homes, young entrepreneurs launching small businesses with community grants, and students proudly holding college diplomas that once seemed impossible to reach. Every image told the same quiet truth. Hope multiplied when someone chose to invest in another person's future. I stood near the entrance greeting volunteers as they arrived, and for the first time since joining Hayes Global Foundation, I was no longer introducing myself as a project manager. Earlier that spring, Adrian had asked me to lead the foundation's national community partnerships, expanding programs that connected local organizations with long-term funding instead of one-time donations. The promotion had surprised me, but the responsibility had changed me even more. I had learned that leadership was never about standing above people. It was about helping them discover strengths they had not yet seen in themselves. Across the room, Adrian was speaking with several scholarship recipients and their families. He still carried the same calm confidence that had once intimidated everyone in the office, but now I understood what stood behind it. It was not pride. It was purpose. He noticed me watching and smiled before excusing himself from the conversation. "How does it feel?" he asked as he joined me. I looked around the ballroom, where volunteers, donors, employees, and families spoke together without invisible walls separating titles or positions. "It feels honest," I answered. Adrian nodded. That was always the goal. During the evening's presentation, there were no oversized portraits of the Hayes family, no lengthy speeches celebrating corporate achievements, and no attempts to turn generosity into a marketing campaign. Instead, former scholarship recipients shared their own stories. A teacher described how a new library had transformed an entire neighborhood. A young engineer explained that a foundation grant had allowed him to become the first college graduate in his family. The applause that followed each story sounded warmer than anything money alone could ever purchase. As the program concluded, Adrian invited me to stand beside him for one final announcement. "Every generation inherits something," he told the audience. "Some inherit wealth. Others inherit opportunity. The greatest inheritance of all is the chance to leave the world kinder than we found it." He looked toward me before continuing. "That future belongs to people who quietly choose compassion every single day." I did not need a microphone to understand he was speaking to all of us. Later, after the guests had gone home and the lights had begun to dim once again, Adrian and I walked through the peaceful gardens where our friendship had first become something deeper. The autumn air felt familiar, carrying the same gentle breeze as the year before. He reached for my hand, and this time there was no hesitation from either of us. We had built something stronger than admiration and steadier than coincidence. We had built trust through countless ordinary choices, shared purpose, and unwavering respect. Looking back, I realized the most extraordinary moment of my life had never been receiving an unexpected invitation. It had been discovering that genuine love often begins when two people recognize the best qualities in each other and choose to protect them together. If this journey taught me anything, it is that success may open doors, but kindness is what invites people inside. Titles fade, applause ends, celebrations become memories. Yet every act of compassion continues living in the hearts of the people whose lives it touches, and that is the kind of legacy that never grows old.